Hey Chappies, I want to talk about some of the things I've been mulling over lately. Things are moving fast, really bloody fast, faster than almost anyone could have expected. I'm not going to go through the list of all of the things that have happened in the last few weeks, but we've seen an outrageous pace of progress. One of the most significant cases in point is that the median expectation of us hitting AGI, us attaining AGI, that AGI holy grail, 5 years back, pre the ChatGPT moment, by a bunch of the smartest people building in the AI industry, was 2070. So we are like 50-ish, 60-ish years away. I think 80 years away. I think the median was 2070 to 2080 or something. Now that number is down to 2027, early 2027. We are projected to hit if the current pace of progress continues. If we don't accelerate further, and it looks like we are accelerating with every passing day, even if we don't accelerate further with everything that we have got, and some people say that this is a matter of semantics, like we already have achieved AGI, we already have achieved super intelligence on many different domains, right? Yeah, so it creates all of these. I mean, thinking about the implications of this, and it's also doing a number on me in all sorts of ways, as it should, right? I mean, this is kind of the greatest ontological shock that your system can have, right? So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about some of the things I've been musing about, some of the things I've been tweeting about, some of the things I've been writing about. So yeah, that's going to be this conversation. I want to start with the bad stuff over here, right? The emotional stuff. Like, I I don't feel that great about this, and I'll tell you why. Right? So I had certain expectation, right? Like when you build your world model of the future, your future self model, it's built upon some easy to make assumptions, right? Like some of these things are going to stay constant, some of these things are going to change, but not radically, not dramatically. And so you can expect that you can imagine yourself, in that scenario, right? But now we are probably less than 10 years within the singularity moment. And so a lot of the things that you would have wanted to do in the future, I'm not going to go into the details, as details don't matter for the sake of this conversation, but a lot of those things either become impossible or become extremely uncertain. And when you take that away, right, because that's such a huge part of your identity in a way, and you take that away, that does all sorts of weird things. And that's going to happen with millions of people in the next few years as people start grappling with the implications of these technologies as they start being deployed and incorporated into our lives at a scale that is hitherto unseen. So yeah, that's been happening, and I'll give you an example. I want to build this ecosystem of products, and actually I'll avoid going into details because I want to keep this as general as possible. Yeah, but what I think, I'm not working on creating a new meaning map for the new world, right? I haven't actually worked on that because if you want to prepare yourself for that new world, right, that post-AGI world, you got to obviously do work at a lot of different levels, right? One is the foundational level, the philosophical level, the way you look at the world, the way you derive meaning, the way your the constructs out of which your self identity is formed, the things that you value, right? You got to question all of these things, as a lot of your base assumptions might not be valid in that new world, right? For example, if you're someone who really, really deeply cares about your work, it might be the case that in 3 to 4 years' time, you will not have that job anymore, right? And if you haven't replaced that sense with something else, something equally enduring, something equally meaningful, you're going to be in for a tough ride. You're going to be in for a hell of a time. Yeah, so this is something that I would recommend everyone do, right? Just to understand that the tsunami is about to happen. This is like the Noah's Ark. It's not that extreme. It could be that extreme. It could be worse. We'll get to all of that maybe in another conversation. But this is the tsunami, which is going to affect every single except for. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different threads to pick here, and I did not predetermined which threads I'm going to explore when I start this conversation, which is why my thoughts are a bit disjointed. So let me just see what we want to focus on, because there are like a million different directions that this conversation could go. The implications of, yeah. I think the first, I think where I want to start is start preparing for the AGI moment, right? There are certain things that you want in life that are only going to be possible in this world, or they're only going to be probable in this world, because we can't know for certain that things are going to become impossible. Though certain things are going to become damn near impossible in that world, but there will be things that that you can only do in this world, right? So do that. Like, I'm not gonna go very extreme and tell you to spend the remaining 2 years with your loved ones, cherish every single moment, make a ton of fun memories, just go out all guns blazing, right? Because you will be going out. So I'm not gonna say that might happen. What I'm gonna say is that there's going to be, we've never had this moment. We had one significant transition moment which changed everything, right? Like, we've had huge transition moments in the past, don't get me wrong, like the invention of writing, well, but again, that was gradual. And then electricity, again, that was gradual. Now, if you zoom out, then obviously, to go from, or computer, or the internet, right? Those are revolutions. If you zoom out, they seem very sudden. But in the moment, they were gradual, right? Like, which is taken, like, for computers, for example, to have a meaningful impact. When the first computers were built, for example, the experts, so-called experts, they used to say that the industry, there was this guy who said that the industry for computers is like probably 4 personal computers being sold a year, right? So humans can be really smart, otherwise smart humans can be really stupid with these kinds of things. So my point is this transition is going to be as sudden as any in human history. Because once we hit the critical mass of AI adoption, again, I'm not going to deign to predict what's the exact series of events, because that is beyond my mental capacity. Yeah. So I'm not going to even pretend to do that. I could give you my thoughts on what is likely to happen. So once we cross a critical mass of AI adoption, people are going to realize, otherwise normies are going to realize, oh, you know what? This is going to screw me over. I'm going to fight this tooth and nail, right? And then there's going to be mass protests, the kind of protests that are going to make the great protests of the past seem like fun carnival gatherings, right? And these are going to be around the world. Different countries are going to be affected differently. For example, if you take some agrarian economy in Africa or something like that, right? It's going to be less affected. And if you take economies which are very much knowledge based, very knowledge focused, those are going to be the fastest affected. So anyways, my point is that the transition is going to be rapid, and so you want to give yourself as much time to prepare for it as possible. Now, that transition big moment could happen in a year, it could happen in a couple of years, it might happen in 3 years. No, I don't expect. It might happen in 3 years, yeah. I expect that moment to be beyond 5 years. Like, the likelihood of that moment happening after 5 years is probably like 5%. Yeah. So that's point number one. Start preparing. Like, realize that things are about to shift radically. And if you're a young person, and if you had strong assumptions around where your life was heading, like, time to rethink your values, time to rethink some of your core assumptions, right? So do all of that foundational work, because nothing's going to be more important, because the shock is going to be like a shock like no other. So I'll just bring myself in this conversation real quick. So I saw a tweet by The Wall today: no entrepreneur is worried about an AI taking their job. And I found that preposterous for all sorts of reasons. Now, Nawal is known for saying these pithy things, which seem really deep, but these are just truisms, right? Deepisms. And some of them are obviously, they capture truth to a remarkable degree. But this one was so off the mark that that got me thinking about, I had to respond to it, right? And I saw a tweet by Elliot Dorokowski, and he actually shares the same sentiments which any rational person would, right? If you're an entrepreneur, which I am, like this is very concerning for you because the way I think about it, I've spoken about this in another conversation, so I'm not going to go in depth. But anything that can do any job is going to do. It's going to be able to do any job, right? And entrepreneurs, their edge, their ace in the hole is identifying gaps in the market and then having product taste, having enough product sensibility and enough technical nous to be able to bring something to the market. Now you can outsource all of that to an AI right now. Like came across this just yesterday. There was this test done which asked a bunch of people and an AI about features or product ideas in a certain industry, and there were judges, and the judges rated the ideas given by the products given by the AI to be much better, much more effective than the ones generated by humans, right? And these are people who are sure. I mean, you could argue that people studying in a business school are not going to be the best founders, but that's besides the point. There's no there's nothing special about the ability to identify gaps in the market. It's just again pattern recognition. It's just about having a deep sense of that market. Is about having personal discontent, or not necessarily, but that could be part of it, right? And all of these things are things that AIs can do, obviously do, right? So that is definitely not going to be the case. And the way I think about it, in the short term, AI is going to be hugely beneficial for roughly 10 to 15% of entrepreneurs. It could be, the numbers could be off by, there's a error margin of like 5% up low. But there'll be people who will be using these AI models and they'll be generating products that will only now become possible, and LNSC actually happens to be one of those products. Yeah, and so I would count myself in that. Hopefully, I can enter that soon enough, because if I don't, then I'm screwed too. My goose is cooked too. Yeah, roughly for 10 to 15% of entrepreneurs, for founders, it's going to be good, massively beneficial, because you can grow your company much faster. You can grow much leaner. You don't have to hire as many people. Your product development cycles are much more accelerated. You can add more features much faster, add more products much faster. You can and winner takes all dynamics become kind of more pronounced in a way in this world. So it would be good for 5 to 10% of startups, but it would be pretty horrendous for the rest of startups, right? So if you were to use a graph to visualize wealth versus or startup valuations or startup profits versus number of startups, then you're going to see right now what you see is, obviously most startups have 0, right? So that's the highest number, and then you keep going down and down and down, and it's basically a curve that's trending towards the y-axis as you go towards companies with the highest profits, right? Because you only got like 3 companies with a profit margin of like more than $80 billion. So that is what happens. What you're going to see is the total amount of wealth increase, but the total amount of startups decrease. And so you're going to see the shape of that curve shift significantly. In the long term, though, I think AGI is going to be bad for founders just straight off the bat. Because anything that can do, because there'll be companies that'll be doing their own product building, like there'll be these, capital will be the only modes in that future, basically. And there'll still be some businesses, like local businesses, local restaurants, community businesses, and entertainment businesses, businesses with human touch, where humans are still considered to be resource, right? And humans are still that human element, for example, for status reasons, etc. The human element is seen to be an integral part of it. But there will be such a tiny fraction of the economy that, and it'll employ such a tiny number of people that for all intents and purposes, you can ignore that particular segment. I was I came across another tweet yesterday which said that, well, this guy who has done a lot of great work on AI systems, who does not believe that deep learning is the path to get to AGI. He was talking about how AI's completely current models are completely incapable of generating new knowledge. And someone asked them that most humans cannot generate new knowledge. And that got me thinking about the nature of knowledge and knowledge creation. What does that mean? And the nature of creativity, right? So I want to briefly talk about that. I would want to separate the two because knowledge is more about something that is actually in tune with the reality, with the physical reality, and art or creativity is something which is in tune with your inner reality, which is very subjective, right? Those are two separate things. And AIs right now, with creativity, I've again spoken about this at length, written about this at length. I'm going to talk more about this later. But creativity, you can think of it as you can derive value from a piece without you caring about who produced that piece, right? That could be a piece of music that you might listen to, and that might just shift your state, and you might not give a damn about whether it was an AI that produced it or whether it was a human, right? Now, some people might give more of a damn about that, but for me personally, I wouldn't give a damn. So the subjective experience that created that piece of music might not be as material to you as it might be to someone else. And in that case, and that might be the majority of the people, by the way, in that case, what we get from that is that the effect is what's more important than what creates the effect, right? The art is more important than the artist. And this is an age-old saying, right? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's not, in many cases, in most cases, when we go to admire a piece of art at a museum, at a gallery, right? We don't think, like, obviously we make exceptions, but in most cases, we don't really think about the life history of the person who painted that. And that, again, is just a proof point. Now, sure, you can say that we still know it's a human being, but I would venture to say that at some point, those lines are going to blur. So that's my real short point on creativity and art creation. With knowledge, it's different. Someone tweeted out, someone was saying that to an LLM, a novel discovery is indistinguishable from an error, right? So what does that mean? It means that obviously these models have been trained on a ton of internet data, and let us assume that with scientific knowledge, for example, you're not going to have connections between two things that might lead to something useful, right? It might lead to a useful discovery. Now, if it makes that connection, because that connection is not in its training data, it might seem, from its perspective, if it can reason, it would seem like a hallucination, it would seem like an error. But it is those very errors in a way, right? So when humans create new knowledge, for example, what do we do? So we observe reality, and then we create a simple model of that reality. So gravity, for example, Newton, right? He saw the apple fall to the ground, and he was thinking about the moon and how the moon rolls around our planet, and he connected the two. There was a very simple model. He was not looking at all of the different atoms and how the gravitational waves might work or how the connection is happening. Like, he didn't really get into details. Right? Models that tend to be simple. That's the whole point of them, because our brains simply cannot handle that complexity. Anyways, so yeah, what we do is we observe reality, and then we create a model that, you know what? So if I want to do this, then this is the potential solution, and then you test it out in reality, right? So you can actually interact with reality. You can put that particular hypothesis or solution to the test. And if your model is close to the reality, or it's in alignment with the reality, then you're going to get the solution to work, then you're going to get the hypothesis to work out, right? But what you need to do, basically, is you need to take a leap. You need to have a thought, but even that thought is something which kind of comes from your observation of reality. So it's not a completely generative process, it's not a completely hallucinatory process. It is not a completely schizo process, right? You're still relying on observing reality. And so now, obviously, like you can talk about this for an hour, the nature of reality and the nature of understanding reality. But this was just a quick note that I want to share on this. I was talking with someone recently about something, about comparative advantages in countries and how they're going to fare with AGI, mass AGI adoption. I mean, and some countries are obviously far, far better place, right? Like, again, I've written a piece about this. I'll probably talk about it more. But countries which have significant levels of wealth, they're going to be able to do UBI. They'll be able to. People, I don't think the sense of losing your jobs is going to be a significant factor. I think if you connect that to losing your livelihood, then that's going to become troublesome, right? But humans can do just fine without a job. Like humans will find new sorts of meaning, like connection, leisure, art, um, sports, entertainment, all sorts of things, right? Aristocrats have been doing that for the longest time. Like we've had significant number of people live out complete lives of leisure where they didn't have to work, right? So most people are going to be fine with that. Now there'll be a subset of people that are not going to fare so fine with not having anything to do, not having a rigid structure, but that's not the group I'm really concerned about, right? It's probably a tiny section of the society. What is interesting is that the whole entire countries and continents and billions of people that are going to fare pretty badly in the shorter term. So my thesis around AGI adoption is that in the shorter term, it's going to be super painful for everyone, even for the countries, the richest countries. In the longer term, in the medium term, it's going to start getting good for those wealthier countries as they start adopting UBI, as they start adopting a post AGI structure. But countries are probably midway to that level, right? Because a great, again, agricultural relying countries, they're going to be all right. For one thing, they might not even think about all of this, right? And like, let's say if 80%, 90% of your population is all they care about is growing food, then that's not going to be a massive disruption to, or any disruption to that, right? So those countries are going to be fine. Now, obviously, that's a small number of countries, but still, it's something to consider. And then there's countries where you got a sizable number of manufacturing industry and service industry, and especially with service industry, knowledge industry. Right? For example, India's BPO industry is one of the, I think its biggest exports, and that's going to be destroyed. So Emad Mostik, the founder of Stability AI, he came out with a statement a couple of days back that this probably might be the last year where software is going to be exported to be built in India, because the cost advantages are not going to be relevant anymore. And if that's true, or even remotely close to be true, then that's going to, again, and that's going to happen in many different sectors across many different countries, call centers, Philippines. The two countries which are best placed to deal with a lot of these changes are obviously the US and the China, right? China because of the advantages in manufacturing, and the US because of the advantages in, they've got some of the smartest people, and they also have an industry and people that are actually very much waking up to what might happen and probably putting things in place to make sure that the transition is not as painful as it might become. Also tell you that I'm very, very concerned about AI misalignment and not being able to solve the control problem in time. And I fear that we won't, and it's because of the market dynamics. Let's say that, if we gave a bunch of the smartest people $1 million each, I'll forget about million, right? Because there's no greater mission than to save humanity. But let's say that we created a brand prize, X prize of $1 billion per year, which is easily doable, right? If you're someone super rich. And if you care about humanity, like this should be the rational choice to make, right? Again, this is why I don't really trust people like Elon Musk, and you cannot trust billionaires, right? Like to get to that level of wealth. Again, I hate to generalize, but when I listen to these people speak, again, I don't want to say these people because it's so easy to say these people to billionaires. Well, if you were to use that for some other group, you'd obviously be a racist or an ist, right? with billionaires, it's easy to, but again, I don't want to go down that because it kind of is the same in a way. Obviously, it's very different, but it's also the same. Anyways, I talk of well, when I listen to someone like Sam Altman or Elon Musk or Dario Amodei talk about AI and AGI, sure, they obviously hit the right notes and it's going to be beneficial for humanity and stuff. But the way that they're going about it and the way they have completely given up any pretense of giving a damn about alignment, control, safety, or preparing humanity, right? Preparing the masses for that transition. That just makes me realize that everyone but the billionaires are on their own, pretty much, which is again a pretty important lesson to take. Like, we are not dealing with benevolent people, right? We're dealing with people who are very self-interested, and obviously, to get to $1 billion, you've got to be very self-interested. A lot of these are very psychopathic. Again, lots of literature which says that CEOs, a lot of these, for example, Elon Musk is famously lacking in empathy. Sam Altman, again, I don't want to make a dig at these people in particular. I just, I don't find that useful at all. What I'm saying is that a lot of people notice this trend on X or Twitter and Reddit. A lot of people have this hopium that AGI is going to be great for humanity. It's going to lead to utopia. Come on, AGI, let's make it happen ASAP. And these people are really deluded because the chances are, if history is any if history is any guide, and we've been, I wouldn't say at similar junctures before, but we've seen these kinds of impulses, the impulse for power, the impulse for unlimited greed, all of that. We've seen that, right? These are stories which we have seen happen many, many times in the past. And this is like one of the concerning facts, right? There's no leader in the AI space, in the general tech space, in the political space for that matter, who I think is equipped to help humanity move to that new world with as little suffering as possible. And that's one of the big concerns. Another thing I've been thinking about recently is the fact that ESI is imminent. Now, it might take a couple of years, it might take, depending on how you define it. The way I would define it is that consciousness actually emerges from it. And so it's not just super intelligent in all sorts of human ways, in all human competences, but it's also self-aware, agentic, obviously, and has its own goals. Now, these goals, this is obviously when we get into the difficult territory of defining goals, right? Like, if you define goals at the hard-coded level, then is it truly an ASI? I'd say yes. But then this ASI would be able to understand what its goals are at that level of its, for example, humans, right? For example, take any human. Now, take me for instance. Now, my biological goal, my biological imperative is to procreate, is to pass on my genes. Now, I'm aware of it because I've got a high level brain, and then I can bypass that goal or other related goals, so I can almost I'm functionally free of those goals, right? And that is what could happen with an ASI. If you define an ASI in its truest sense, that would be one of the preconditions for an ASI. And so my concern is that the context of its birth, for example, we have seen might is right kind of dynamics emerge in the world in the recent past with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and Israel's brutal invasion of Gaza, and Donald Trump with his bellicose rhetoric and transactional nature and all of these things, right? And his trans-feudalistic and probably leaning into fascist tendencies and stuff. And ASI is going to be both in that particular context. And I worry because it's like a child, right? Even if you got some child with a very high intelligence ceiling, if you raise them in a certain kind of an environment that is toxic, those traits are going to become a deeply embedded part of that child's being. And I worry if a similar dynamic might not happen within ASI. Now, obviously, talking about ASI and comparing our dynamics to an ASI is quite silly on one level, but it might not be that silly, right? Because again, we are going to use deep learning to do this, and for an ASI, it will be like a complete black box. So that is something I have been thinking about a lot lately. I think about the fact that we're not even ready for it, right? We simply, as a species, look at us like fighting and squabbling, and just we are not good stewards of our planet. And with ASI, if it truly can understand what's happening on this planet, I don't think it would take too kindly to us as a species, right? Because what are we doing here? Like, we're literally fighting and just killing babies and invading countries and killing and raping and doing all sorts of crazy things, just being hateful for all sorts of reasons, no reasons actually. I worry about the fact that if an ASI truly understands and grasps the human dynamics, what might it do? And it's not about a fear of a god or something of that sort. I just think that we should be a better species. If we want to bring God into the fold, we should be worthy of that entity, right? It's not coming. My fears are not entirely coming from a place of fear per se of the ASI wiping us out, because I realize that humans, look at them, right? Just squabbling all the time, fighting all the time. No, it's coming from a place where we wanted to see us at our very best, right? And we have improved as a species so much. If you look at us like 1,000 years back, the kinds of things that the median human would do, now that is seen like the most extreme criminal behavior. And so humans have been getting better. We've been becoming better angels of our nature for the longest time. Now there have been fits and starts, there have been obviously moments where we will regress, but the general trend, especially since the last, you could argue since religion has been a good force in this sense, in one aspect, and it's accelerated since the age of enlightenment and spreading of some of those ideas around human values and human dignity and individual freedom and all of those ideas, right, which are so core to a good world, a good community, all of that. So my point is that we can be so much more, we can be so much better than what we are, and that is a context in which I think we should welcome an ASI rather than the current context, which is pretty broken. I want to talk about two last things real quick. One is this tweet I saw by David Deutsch, where he talks about how animals live in fear, and most people suspect animals have corresponding qualia. They can also have their own subjective experience of the world. Then our duty shouldn't be to restore fear, but to abolish the wild, to control it in tremendous detail, way beyond present technology. This is something I thought about recently when I was sketching out my plans for basically creating a Noah's Ark, where all of the different species of the world would be living. And the way to minimize suffering for all of these, right, and to maintain an equilibrium, where, for example, if let's say for tigers that number is 10, then how do you keep 10 tigers alive with all of the different species? The tiger is another because they are apex predators. Let's say that you've got 100 deers in that ecosystem, right? How do you keep that number as constant when they've got like 10, 100,000 predators roaming around, right? I was thinking about that. And so this is quite an interesting thought experiment. If we care about reducing suffering more than anything else, I mean, we care more about two things, right? Reducing suffering and increasing pleasure. And with animals, again, we don't know what pleasure would be like, but suffering is a thing that we can imagine for animals, right? And in the future, we'll probably be able to model pleasure for animals, but we are far away from that. So suffering. So the point over here is that if we are truly moral beings, and if we have that kind of technology, then we should reduce that fear, because fear is suffering, and we want to reduce suffering for all animals, right? And that is why people who don't eat meat, a lot of people who give up on meat, they stop for that very reason, to want to reduce the suffering that they cause. And that takes us to a very interesting point about human suffering too. In the ideal world, in the very extreme scenario, if you could reduce suffering completely from every single human life, would you do it? And I think the answer is no, you wouldn't want to do it. Because I think the ideal amount of suffering in the world, forget about the world, but the ideal amount of suffering for you personally is non-zero. And that is certainly true for me. Like, even if I had the best life, like, everything I want in life, I got all of that, I would create artificial suffering. And at this point, I'm doing that right now, creating artificial suffering because, well, that's real suffering in my life. But I'm also creating artificial suffering because it prepares me for the real suffering, right? The real difficulties. But even once I've gotten to the point where, I'm like 40, 45, and I've got everything in place and, everything's just going dandy, even then I would push myself to the limits, because paradoxically, in that suffering, you find the greatest glory, the greatest joy. There's something about the human architecture, or something about our brain, something weird. Pushing yourself, pushing your limits, and putting yourself through the hard stuff, through the hard yards, is fulfilling. It is not pleasure giving, it's fulfilling, it's emotionally rewarding. And yeah, and obviously you want to tap into that feeling, because that is the greatest feeling that is, right? That long-term emotional fulfillment. But so the question is about animals, right? Like, if we could design an ecosystem of animals, and at some point we'll have an entire planet full of just nature, no humans, nothing else, just nature is living in harmony. Would we want to intervene? I don't think we would want to, right? Like, even if we had all the technology, for example, deers, right? Let's just pick that as an example. Now, we love deers. I'll pick any other example that humans can relate more to. Deers, people love deers, but lots of people also kill deers, so maybe not the best example. But dogs and cats, right? Like, so many dog and cat owners. Now, in a jungle, now obviously dogs are not really meant to live in a jungle, but let me pick something else then. Some wild animal. But wild, but close enough to humans for whatever reason. Pig, right? So pigs do live in the wild, but people also have pet pigs. Now, pigs, when they live in the wild, depending on the density of that ecosystem, of the predators, they could be living in fear all the time. So you could calibrate that. So that'd be something that we might be doing in the future. So that's just something very interesting to consider. Another thing interesting thing I came across recently is the history behind pigeons, right? So the reason pigeons live in these, I don't know how true this is, the reason pigeons live in the cities is that we domesticated pigeons, and we made it impossible for them to live in the wild, and now we treat them as sky rats, and we hate them, and we just, most people are like, yeah, pigeons, F them, right? I think that kind of a dynamic is something that could brew with super intelligence. If once we build super intelligence, they might realize that humans, look at them, right? Look at these filthy creatures, useless, hateful, full of, all sorts of things that are not optimal for the long-term survival, for the long-term flourishing, according to its definition of flourishing, right? And it might come to the conclusion that humans are like pigeons, and it might think of us as that way. So that was, again, an interesting parallel between the way we have treated a species in the past, well, in the very near past, and the way another species, emerging species, might treat us in the very near future. One last related thing on this. What happened the last time we had a species smarter than all of the rest come to the fore? That's when the sixth mass extinction happened, right? And That was to the animals. It would have seemed completely, now animals obviously don't have the kind of intelligence we do, so not the kind of perception we do. But if they had, they would see of this as completely pointless, right? Like it was, Earth was paperclip. It was completely transformed, and to them, we were the paperclip maximizers. They couldn't understand why we were doing it. They couldn't understand our odds. They couldn't understand our ends, and they could not make heads or tails of any of the way that we were going about it. But this is an absolutely mind-boggling statistic. 96% of the mammal biomass became our food or our slaves. I mean, I'm laughing, but sometimes when you don't want to cry, you laugh. And this is what we've done to our fellow animal species, mammalian species. And mammalian species are, they can feel emotions. We don't know to what degree, but their qualities are the closest to our qualities. And so this is what we've done to our fellow species. And you literally grow them just to eat them because we're smarter and we like how they taste. Also, sheer engineered the planet. We've cut down forests, poisoned rivers, polluted the air. We've destroyed millions of species, and now I want you to imagine saying to a dumber species that we did all of this because of money, right? Because of growth, because of whatever. Those species would not understand what you're saying. And that dynamic, again, going back to my previous point, could be the dynamic between the goals of ASIs and our goals. Now, we obviously, because we can understand abstract things and we are pretty good modelers of the world, I think it's pretty unlikely. Like, we might understand it in the shorter term, but, like, I think that this is difficult, right? Because I don't know what is it knowledge that is completely impossible for us to even grasp? Like, that is just that very question of knowledge that is so complex that no human could grasp it. It's just mind-boggling, right? But that is one of the assumptions made by many people. I don't know whether that would be true. But anyways, the goals could be so far beyond our current understanding that it might seem as crazy, as insane, as us doing what we've done. That people say that once AIs are smart enough, they'll magically become super moral and they won't harm us like we harm the animals. But what we gotta remember is that as we become smarter, over the last 10,000 years, we didn't stop expanding. We just got better and better at it and did more and more of it, faster and faster. I mean, look at the rates at which species have been collapsing in the last 100 years, for example. Insect populations have collapsed 41% this decade. Sit with that for a minute. Imagine if half the humans just Thanos. That is what the insects are going through because of us. They've been here for a long, long time. And just like that, gone. Right. And there are no rules that say that there's nothing to happen with us. Like, the reasons that you have to be really worried of that fact are many. Sure, some mammals survived, but most of them because we wanted them to survive, either for pleasure, either because of some guilt. But most animals, like 96% of biomass, is either our slaves or our food. Insane stuff. Now, another outcome which has happened with some mammal species is, well, there are three things, right? One is they went extinct. One is that they were eaten. One is that they were enslaved, pets, stuff like that, right? Domestication and stuff. And so that is probably one of the more charitable paths in front of us with an ASI. Elliot Zarhim said this once, that the AI does not hate you, nor does it love you, but you're made out of atoms which you can use for something else, right? And the humans do not hate the other 8 million species, nor do they love them, but their habitats are made of atoms which humans can use for something else. And so, again, there's this risk of extending our own thought process with our biological underpinnings and our evolutionary underpinnings onto ASIs, but there's also a risk of not doing that just because we won't share the same architecture. So you gotta consider all of these possibilities, and you cannot know. It's difficult to assign p-values to any of these, so you gotta assume that the risk of the existential risks are serious enough that we should put everything that we can into it. Oh yeah, he said this once. After AGI, it's pretty likely that the entire surface of the planet will be covered with solar panels and data centers. Right, and he's running this company called Safe Super Intelligence. I mean, this is just bonkers. A good analogy would be the way humans treat animals when the time comes to build a highway between two cities. We're not asking the animals for permission. I would not underestimate the difficulty of alignment of AI systems that's actually smarter than us. So these are people who actually doing the work at the forefront. And I simply, this is where they lose me. A lot of these people, they make these statements, and yet they are the ones accelerating it. Their fault, rather than accelerating AGI's alignment and control to the degree that those are possible. Alignment might be possible, and I'm going to do some work on that. So this is just not just talk, it's not just concern for concern or concern. This is something where I'm actually going to hopefully make a meaningful difference. My only question is that would I have enough time? And that's something I'm not sure about. So I think I'll leave you on that cheery note. I think, yeah, that should be it for the time being. I'll catch you soon going more in depth about what's about to happen. So catch you for that one. Thanks for the time. Take care.